I am Amanda Sorek. I work with International IDEA. I'm in the New York office where we have an office at the UN. We observe the work that the UN, the General Assembly most specifically, and also ECOSOC is doing. And we try to bring the voice of democracy into the UN discussions.
Hi, this is Liana Suchadolska, Paris 21. It's a partnership in statistics for the development in the 21st century. We are hosted at the OECD in Paris, but we work mainly with national statistical offices in low and middle income countries. We mobilize donor funding for the work. And my team is in charge of gender mainstreaming, ensuring that the gender perspective is integrated at all stages of statistical value chain.
Hi, everyone. My name is team leader and executive director at Badili, the political engagement of grassroots women who organize in chamas, which are informal cooperatives. And also we cultivate the leadership and political engagement both in tertiary institutions and the informal settlements. And we're also very keen on ending gender-based violence as a very, very key deterrent to how women show up in public spaces. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for all of you for taking out the time to be here with us and sharing your insights on this very relevant topic. So let's begin our conversation with the very basics. Because this is a knowledge sharing webinar, what is really important is for us to have like a ground level understanding of what the high level political forum is and how is SDG 5 on gender equality being reviewed at this forum. So what is the process like? What does it involve? And how are young women involved in this process? So Amanda, would you like to sort of start off the topic and tell us about this?
Yeah, so I'll give a brief overview of what the HLPF is, and then I'll let also Liliana and Binam speak about what they think that the role of young women is for the HLPF. So the HLPF was established in 2012, and it was right towards the end of the MDG, so the Millennium Development Goals, which was the set of goals approved by the UN to be implemented from 2000 to 2015, and then the SDGs came in place in 2015 with the 2030 agenda. The High-Level Political Forum is the main platform at the UN to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals, all of the politics surrounding it, and also hear from different stakeholders. So it's a place where you do have a lot of civil society organizations come participate in the discussions. There are several governments that also come, very high level people from governments that come to the HLPF to showcase their reports. Many governments present their voluntary national reviews during the high-level political forum. This year, for example, we're going to have 37 countries presenting their VNRs, which assesses progress, challenges, and the way forward in the implementation of the SDGs in their national context. So it really is a place for everyone to come together and talk and see what are we going to do to implement the SDGs. The SDGs, unfortunately, are not on track. So the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, he will be presenting a new report on the progress of sustainable development on the SDGs next week. And this report shows that only 20% of the SDGs are currently on track, which is an improvement from 17% from last year. Not great numbers. There are many factors that impacted this, including the COVID-19 pandemic, several conflicts taking place around the world, and most importantly, lack of financing, which was also one of the topics just recently discussed in Spain during the Financing for Development conference. So while the HLPF is a really great platform for all of these different stakeholders, so government, civil society, NGOs, CSOs, UN system, and so forth to come together to figure out what we're going to do next, it really is a matter of having more political will in order to implement a lot of these goals at the national level. Now, in terms of what young women can do, I will let first my colleagues speak, and then I'll be happy to take the floor again because I don't want to be the only one speaking.
No, of course. And Liliana and Bina, in whoever wants to go first, I would also sort of want you to reflect on how do you think this review will impact the future of gender equality? We want to bring in the conversation and center it around young women, but let's also sort of reflect on what this means for the future of gender equality globally. So whoever wants to go first is welcome to do that.
Bina, would you like to go ahead or should I?
Liliana.
Okay, so just to build on your question, Amna, and what Amanda has said already, it's really what I'm expecting. It's to be a strategic global check-in mid-course. So we have 5 years left to the horizon of the 2030 agenda. And we really need to take that stock take of where we are in the SDG 5. So I expect that we'll be highlighting gaps in terms of progress, but also data gaps, aligning also with critical processes like Beijing plus 30, of course, the financing for development, the Compromiso de Sevilla, and the Pact for the Future. So these are important global documents that also touch upon gender equality. This review is expected to frame gender equality as central, not peripheral, to sustainable development planning. But we know that we are in 2025 and it has been really a dramatic year for gender equality worldwide. So we know we are facing a global pushback against gender equality. So according to UN Women in 2024, nearly a quarter of governments worldwide reported a backlash on women's rights. And how are we going to react then on the plummeting funding for development cooperation? So the OECD is already projecting 9 to 17% drop in official development assistance this year, which has been already noted last year as a 9% drop. So it's really a plummeting situation here. Foundational data sources such as demographic health survey have been stopped. So we, despite glaring data gaps, even with this survey, without this survey, we are really going to find ourselves with no information on the status of women and girls in low and middle income countries. So I expect the HLPF team also to emphasize the science and evidence-based solutions that are aligned to data-driven policymaking, and it should be a crucial platform to push back against deprioritization and reassert gender equality as a non-negotiable in global policy.
Absolutely. Bina, do you want to also reflect on that?
Certainly, I want to yeah, certainly, Amna. I want to reflect on that, and more importantly, I want to speak to SDG 5, but with a critical view on women and young people's political representation, because as we know, quality political representation has an impact on the social and economic outcomes of any country. And I think when I just look at the African context in itself, and just reflecting on the last report that was done by Afrobarometer in partnership actually with the International IDEA, we are yet to achieve even 50% of women's representation. So we only have about 25% in the continent. And if I still look at the International Parliamentary Union report for 2021, it also reflects on the fact that only 2.6% of young people represented when it comes to parliaments. And for young women, it's less than 1%. And when I reflect in my own country, if I'm to give the Kenyan context, in terms of achieving SDG 5, when just looking at the political representation, young women still lag behind because we have less than 1% of young women who are currently occupying elective office. In fact, at Badili Africa. I remember when we were reviewing data from 2013 to 2017, when, during our last election cycle, and then to 2022, the percentage has remained consistent. What does this mean when it comes to what the SDG 5 envisioned? Because if you look at the challenges that we're talking about, whether it is ending gender-based violence, whether it's women occupying leadership positions, young women and children disproportionately are affected by the effects of any challenge you talk about, you name it, whether it's female genital mutilation, whether it's teenage pregnancy, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's economic exclusion, young women disproportionately bear that burden. And it's important to also really center those conversations, especially when you look at the African continent, because the median age in the African continent is 20. So it's 20, yet when you look at our representation globally, it's just 2.6 of young people below 30 who are parliamentarians. So I think as we reflect and ask ourselves what needs to be done, because we have 5 years to go to 2030, I think it would be very, very important to shift the conversation from just promises to implementation, accountability, and critical financial investments. Thanks.
From promises to implementation, that should be the motto for SDGs now. But Amanda, do you want to come in on that and, sort of round up from where we begin? Because we've set a very nice stage, but I want you to also, add your perspective here.
Yes, and I'm going to take some elements of both Liliana and Bina's inputs as well. So there are a few SDGs that will be under review this year. So number 3 on health, 5 on gender equality, 8 on economic growth, 14th on oceans, and 17 on partnerships. So as both of them mentioned, SDG 5 is going to be on the highlight of this year's review at the HLPF. And I will piggyback on what Bina just mentioned about promises, implementation, and accountability as the way forward. And also tie this to Liliana's comments on different documents that have already been passed, which is the Beijing +30 this year during CSW, the Pact for the Future that was adopted last year, and also the Political Declaration on Financing for Development. So all of these documents address already gender equality. All of the documents passed also during past HLPFs in ministerial declarations and also political declarations of the SDG summits, which takes place every 4 years. So the first one took place in 2019, and then we had one in 2023. The next one is going to be in 2027. They all mention gender equality, empowerment of women and girls, and they make promises for accelerating progress on gender equality more broadly. So we know that this is in the agendas of the UN, not only in these specific documents, but also in different resolutions that are passed in the General Assembly. So it really is a matter, as Bina mentioned, about how to have more accountability in the implementation process for the SDGs. And this is done through monitoring and data, which is something that we do have a lack of. When it comes to SDG 5, less than 30% of the countries and also the areas in relation to SDG 5 have data available. And that is a very big problem, because how do you assess these issues? How do you implement solutions for these problems if you don't have the data to back your policies up? So this is one thing that is also crucial and should be addressed in next week during the high-level political forum. But in order for you to have more data, you also need to have finance of data systems, not just have national statistical offices provide the data that they produce international level. So I think there are many different components to how to really achieve gender equality. Data is a huge component of it for us to really understand the entire ecosystem and how to finance it. So the issues that Bina specifically mentioned can be addressed in a more holistic way. And then I will stop there for now, but I think that hopefully that will give us also some room for more discussion.
Thank you, absolutely. And before we get to that's very important about financing these systems. So, missing data is not missing, and we have enough information to sort of, implement then. And but before we get into that, let's take a step back and talk about the SDG targets, particularly something Bina mentioned was women's political participation and target 5.5. So, what have the trends been until now? And particularly when we reference 5.5, and we can start in any order to sort of understand, what does the current picture looks like? So whoever wants to go first, Liliana, maybe you would want to start this.
Sure, thanks so much, Amna. Yeah, so I think that we should still, we are here to raise the alarm, but we should still congratulate ourselves for the great achievements that have been made. So I'm looking at the chart. I'm seeing the women in national parliaments bar charts, and my first date is 1995, which is the date of the Beijing Platform for Action. So 30 years ago, the share of women in parliament was just 11.3%. Today, the Interparliamentary Union says it's 27.2, so the number have more than doubled. Of course, the space of progress, it's not a satisfactory one. So we know apparently that at this stage, when it comes to our workplace leadership, we can only achieve the gender parity in 140 years, according to the UN. So it's not a place we are satisfied with, absolutely not. When it comes to representation in local governments, globally, women hold 35.5 seats in local governments as of 2023. And it's a small rise from 2020, where it was just at 33%. So overall, I think there are very interesting initiatives that are being taken up by various governments. I can cite some of those in Africa, for example, the introduction of quota, whereby it has really shifted the powers, I think, in the composition of parliaments. So the government of Ethiopia also grants financial support to political parties based on criteria that include the number of female candidates nominated and in leadership position. And Rwanda remains the most prominent example of the successful implementation of quota system. It has maintained gender parity with parliament and even has an overrepresentation of women in the cabinet, which is 55% currently. So these are very promising initiatives. But overall, we still lack data for many countries, and something needs to be done about these basic statistics. Thank you.
Bina, do you want to talk about the on-ground perspective of what does these numbers, how do they reflect on the ground? Like, what does it mean to have 27% when it comes to Kenya, for example? If let's speak about a particular context or the African context as well.
Thank you so much. I think I did share statistics in terms of where we are at in the continent, given the Africa Barometer report that speaks to we are far from reaching 50% representation because women represent 25 to 27% of the 12,000 parliamentarians. But I'd like to give a Kenyan context. And I think I'd like to give a Kenyan context just to also tie with what Amanda was saying about data. And I think the danger I see most of the time is the fact that many a times we barely disaggregate the data by age, by location, whether it's economic status. So we barely do that. And second, I think for me is the fact that most of the time I've also seen we barely recognize, whether it's youth groups, CBOs, youth movements as data generators and not just see them as beneficiaries. Yeah. So that's also a gap when sometimes even as an organization, we have data, but because we do not fall into that bracket of data generators, then it's hard for our own data to be certified. Yet you are working with communities, you're close to the communities that you work with, and are able to contribute to the solutions that are required. But I want to just give a case, just a classic example. So in Kenya, for instance, in 2022, we had 16,100 candidates on the ballot. Whether you are running under, under a political party or as an independent candidate, we had 16,000 candidates on the ballot. Yeah, whether you're running for the presidency all the way to the member of county assembly. Yeah, and of that number, only about 2,000 were women, were female candidates. Only about 2,000. And if you look at that particular number, it means for a country like Kenya, where we have never achieved the 2/3 gender rule that says we shouldn't have we should have at least 30% we shouldn't have more than 30% of the same gender in parliament. So it means with the 2,000 female candidates, even if all of them had won, we still would not have achieved 30%. Yeah, even if all of them had won. So you can imagine, of the 2,000 female candidates who ran, we didn't even have 50% of that number getting elected. Now, when it comes to young women, because that has been my passion and my greatest concern, and it's a space where I usually track how young women participate. We only had 20 young women elected in this country, only 20 across all the positions, whether it was member of county assembly, whether it was a woman representative, because we even had one of the youngest female candidates being elected at 23 years as a woman representative. So going back to all the issues that we speak about, whether be it access to labor markets, be it unpaid care work, be it economic exclusion, be it gender-based violence, be it femicide. And we have seen even the rising cases of femicide in Kenya. Last year, we did have a femicide march. And this year, we have seen even the police reports talking about bizarre numbers, and we're not even seeing much being done. But even as you reflect on the cases of femicide, majority of the guys who've been affected by femicide are actually young women. So most of these challenges still disproportionately affect young women. Then if we are able to track and disaggregate the data, then we are able to know who is being left behind. Because the central theme of the SDGs is leave no one behind. And it's hard to be very keen and intentional on who you're leaving behind if we don't have quality disaggregation of data. Thanks.
Thank you, Bina. And, like Liliana said, there has been progress, even in terms of what numbers are, how they're recorded, what are the trends, but then issues like disaggregation still exist, and they will continue to do unless financing for data collection is done it's done more properly by governments and by the global structures. Amanda, do you want to expand on this point further? On what the trends are for SDG 5.5 specifically, how they have been in the past?
Yeah, and I'll give actually some data from International IDEA. So we are launching a report next week, which is assessing a decade of action. We are zooming in on SDG 5 and also SDG 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, because SDG 5.5 is about gender equality in institutions as a whole, especially when we talk about women in parliament and the numbers that both Liliana and also Bina mentioned, about 27.2% of members of parliament being women, but only about 1% being young women, as Bina and Liliana mentioned. So our report is based on the Global State of Democracy Indices, which reviews 4 different components of democracy on rights, participation, representation, and rule of law. Under rights, we have a factor called political equality, and under this factor, we have gender equality. And that's where my the analysis will be based on, and the data that I'll be providing to all of you. So what we have seen is that from 2015 until 2024, there has been some progress, as both of my colleagues have mentioned. So there are things to be proud of, but the progress has been very slow and very uneven. Only about 2.2% there's been a 2.2% increase in gender equality scores globally, which is about half of the pace from the past decade. So that's something also to be a little bit worried about, because on the progress to really reach the 2030 agenda, it falls short a little bit, right? If you look at it this way. So some of the progress has been seen in Europe, in Latin America, Middle East, and Africa as a whole. And declines have been seen in the Asia region and also in North America. It's important to note, however, that even though there have been progresses and declines in the regions, countries themselves might have a very different scenario. So you might have some countries in regions that are declining that are actually accelerating on gender equality, and vice versa. So in Asia, for instance, one of the biggest setbacks that we have seen in gender equality is in Afghanistan, particularly when the Taliban took over in 2021, that has slashed a lot of the rights for women in the country. We have also seen a lot of declines in Kyrgyzstan, Vanuatu, and Myanmar. In Myanmar, also in relation to the coup of 2021 and the military rule imposed in the country. So we have seen, while we have seen that women in parliaments have increased from 26% from last year to 27.2% this year, there are declines in different indicators of gender equality, including women's participation in civil society organizations that has declined by 2%. Women's freedom of discussion has declined by 25%, and these are all global numbers. Gender-based violence has risen, so it's being worse. And a lot of the violence that we see on women is in terms of politics, in terms of conflict, domestic violence as well is also on the rise. And women's access to justice has also declined by 12%. And there are many factors that we know are contributing to all of these declines, including authoritarian contacts, so the rise of authoritarianism around the world. VDEM has just produced a report that officially says that there are more authoritarian hybrid regimes than democracies, and that's very worrisome. The shrinking of the civic space is also a very big issue. Harassment and gender-based violence it's also a big factor. Censorship, lack of laws, lack of codes, and also patriarchal norms. There is a report by UNDP that talks about more than half of the world's population still think that men are better at higher level positions, especially in government, than women are. And these are just gender norms, biases that many societies believe in, but not necessarily based on truth and facts and data. So those are also important things to highlight. But in AGES, there has been a little bit of progress, but a lot of the indicators have actually declined, and a lot of the indicators that have declined are very, very worrisome. And most of them being also mentioned. In the case of Kenya, I looked over very quickly at our data. Kenya has seen a 60% increase in gender equality scores from 2015 to 2024. But again, it could be many of the different indicators that increase, but other indicators would have declined. So lots of numbers for you guys.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And also thank you for sharing that there's an upcoming report. And if you can, in the chat, maybe tell us when it will be released and, where the link will be. So, participants can also access that later on when it's out, because this sounds very, very interesting and very relevant to what we're talking about today, and, generally about gender equality and the key issues that we're dealing with. This sort of sets the stage very naturally for the next question that we have about the indicators. When we talk about indicators, especially related to gender equality, you spoke about the GNSI index that UNDP has released, the gender national, about social norms, the index that about on social norms. And it's very interesting to see how more than half the world considers as a bias that women are not good leaders. This is not based on anything other than gender social norms. And it really indicates and shows how society is so deeply rooted, patriarchy is so deeply rooted in our social systems that, certain things are just nobody questions them. Um, when we're talking about indicators, how can reporting on indicators be improved at the national level? And what are the lessons learned? Because the question really is on what is the way in which this data is collected? How can the collection of this data be improved? And what can national governments do when they're collecting information? How can that be improved? So what is being looked after and what is required from their end as well? So Liliana, do you want to start with this, and then maybe Amanda and then Bina can come in?
Thank you. I'm not sure. This is an important question. So reporting on gender sensitive SDGs indicators and all indicators that are gender sensitive we know that it's not just a technical or M&E exercise. It's really a matter of justice, inclusion, and ensuring that no one, especially no woman and girl, is left behind. So we believe that gender indicators are integral part of all reporting agendas. So all countries have subscribed to the 2030 agenda. And with that, they are mandated to report on SDGs, of course, according to their capacity. And that's what they do when they go to HLPF. They prepared voluntary national reviews from every couple of years. It's a voluntary exercise, yet most of the governments do that, and they present VNR reports to the high-level political forum in July. Now, talking about the integral part, the gender data being an integral part of statistical system, it's important to understand how national statistical systems work. So they are led usually by national statistical agencies. There are statistical laws that govern how the data is produced by whom. Yet we see huge data gaps in many indicators. And data gaps means not only missing indicators for many, especially least developed countries, it means also that there is no trend data. There might be an old data point from 15 years old. Data may not be always of good quality, and that also affects the reporting. But from what we know, the progress is insufficient. So coming back, how those national statistical systems work and how can we strengthen them? It really means very often providing regular and sufficient funding for their operation, but also raising the awareness about the importance of gender data for countries' development. Okay, this is still not a given. So many governments treat gender data as a standalone problem, which is, tackled when there is time for that or good political momentum, but it's not seen as an integral part of the development. Then the funding in many low and middle income countries, it comes very often in shape of donor funding, which can, as we all know, disappear from one day to another. So it's very unsustainable. Countries where governments fund most of the statistical data collection are in minorities. What can be done when we think of integrating that gender perspective in national statistics? Because we know politicians, they prefer official statistics from their country, and because they believe in their quality, right? So we want to ensure that whatever is produced at the national level is of good quality for policymakers to be used. And that integration of gender perspective can happen at various stages of data production, but Paris 21 kind of core support to countries means the support of creating national strategies for the development of statistics. So these are both plans and processes that create a joint strategy when policymakers and statisticians, they come together. They look at, okay, what is the national development plan? What are the priorities? What are the indicators that we are going to be measuring? And what do we need to go there? So there's a mission statement, there's a vision, there's a strategic framework, there's a costed budget and action plan to achieve that. It's a 5 or 10-year plan. And it also outlines what will be the priority for data production and capacity building for a country. So it's a very important document when we think of really staging and ensuring that that gender perspective is already there. And that means we look at who is at the table. Do we have ministries in charge of women's affairs at that table? Do we have civil society at that table, right? So this is a very important design stage of statistics. Then we know that, okay, one thing is to have a strategy, but another thing is to have it implemented and funded. And we as at Paris 21, we are custodian of the SDG indicator 17-18-3, which measures a number of countries with a national statistical plan fully funded and under implementation. And we know that only 52% of countries that have it fully funded. So we can see it's really not enough. Again, of course, that capacity of statistical system to deliver, it's very complex. So it's not only data that is produced. We also need to make sure that data that is disseminated in a user-friendly format, and it's actually used by that policymakers when they design budget, when they design policy manifestos, and so on. And that doesn't happen yet. So there has been huge resources addressed in the recent years to support gender data production. However, that gender data accessibility has been underlooked so far. So current efforts are really to work with policymakers, and Paris 21 is also undertaking that to understand what are the barriers and enablers of gender data use. So what makes a policymaker use gender data? How do they understand it? How do they even access it? Can they find it on the website of the National Statistical Office? That's a huge question. So we are working with 7 countries across all continents to have a preliminary study on that, and we'll be happy to disseminate results as once they are there. But I also wanted to allude quickly to what Bina said about the sex disaggregated data and the importance of granular insights. This is really crucial. And when we think of gender data, this really goes also beyond sex disaggregation. So gender data has to be disaggregated by either gender or sex, depending on the national definition. But it has to also pertain to gender issues. So not all issues are, there are certain issues that affect women in a more severely than men, right? Like violence. So it's so important to have that granular data disaggregated by not only sex, but also age, geographic location, disability status, and so on. And that is missing, and it doesn't allow us to have that intersectional analysis of data that can help us provide very actionable evidence for policy making. And there's also a missing actor at the decision-making table, but also in data. As Bina alluded, we don't have data from NGOs, non-state actors, civil society at large. And that's a huge problem because current official statistics data production is very, very costly. And countries cannot afford to do it very often. It's a huge, laborious undertaking to even collect, not to even mention censuses, but even surveys. And so national statistical offices are looking into ways to find another source of information. And we know that there are, of course, quality issues, there are issues of reliability, but statistical community and many actors at large work now to develop so-called Copenhagen framework and implement it with countries. It's a framework that will support the inclusion of citizen data, of civil society data into official statistical processes. So stay tuned. We'll be also sharing links to that work. But just to put it on your flag that SDG indicators are a complex endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, please do share links to some of this information, which can be useful. At this point, before I go ahead, I would like to say that all those who've joined, if you have any questions from our panelists, please feel free to write them in the chat, and maybe we can bring them in towards the end of the webinar. But Amanda, do you want to reflect on this question, this very critical question that we're at now?
I think Liliana explained beautifully how the entire system works and all of the gaps. So I don't really have
That's
much
true.
else to add. She did a fantastic job. And what she mentioned, particularly in the end,
Sure.
when it comes to non-official data to complement official indicators, I think this is very crucial. But as she mentioned, we need to look into the quality where the data comes and so forth. So there needs to be work on that. But non-official data so really bridges all the gap that we do see in data nowadays. But everything else, I second every single thing that Eliana said. I have nothing else to add. I wish I did, but she was fantastic.
I will pose this question a little
Yeah, that's so
different.
true.
Bibina, do you want to go ahead? But I can
Yeah,
pose
I
this
just
differently.
okay, please
I
do.
Okay, I will pose this question differently to you. Liliana has sort of explained to us the framework, that the landscape of data right now. But how do we connect this with democracy and the backlash in democracy? Because a lot of these gaps, exist and continue and are perpetuated and reinforced because of social norms, because of the way democracy exists in some of these countries, and unofficial and official data and how it is presented at the national level and then globally has so much to do with what's happening around what's happening in particular contexts. So how does democracy play into this? And how do you see stable democratic systems essential to good data being produced and relayed globally?
Amna, I think I'll just respond briefly, even as I let Amanda maybe speak to that as well. But what I needed to add to what was already shared was number one, in countries, let's say like Kenya, for instance, or let's say in the African context, I think number one, we can also take advantage of the role of county governments. Like, for instance, since Kenya is a devolved state, county governments also really play a crucial role in localizing and reporting on SDGs. Yeah. And as much as we're talking about, yes, there's a limited capacity for funding. Of course, there's weak data systems, but we also just have to look at how can we harmonize the data that we are collecting across grassroots organization, across civil society organization, and also how do we look to these institutions as data producers, especially feminist and grassroots groups. And just to share maybe just two examples from Kenya, I think from the example that was being given on of national bodies partnering, the need for them to partner with community groups. I think that's something that I have seen in my own country, where currently the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics is able to get your data, assess, the ways in which you are able to collect the data, and then they're able to certify that data for it to be shared, and also maybe highlight and give direction on some of the pertinent issues that we are discussing. I think I just need to add that to the responses that have already been shared. And I think lastly for me would be just exploring how we can build collaborative data systems, data ecosystems, where now the national statistic works hand in hand with the movements and the grassroots communities. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Bina. We can also talk about the other part of this question, and whoever wants to can address this. But are there any lessons learned when it comes to reporting on data? Do you have, lessons from the field? Bina already mentioned something about, civil society and the importance of harmonizing that data. But are there other examples, perhaps that can be used as a good practice when it comes to national level data collection?
Right. Well, I can try to take this one. So thanks so much, and I'm so glad to hear what Bina just said about KMBS. Indeed, it's a wonderful initiative, and Kenya was one of the trailblazers of developing a quality decision making, so to say, for national statistical offices to validate the quality of data produced by non-state actors. So on the interesting and then hopefully also good best practices among countries, I think one of the practices I would like to underscore here is the importance of good data coordination. So when you look at the way official data are produced, for gender data, the share of how much data is coming from surveys and how much is actually coming from other data producers, such as ministries of education, ministries of health, that can differ. But when we look at data gaps, the majority of data gaps for gender data is still coming from administrative data sources. And this is a data source that statistics offices cannot usually access. So there are various ministries in the government that produce regular information, regular records, yet another institution in the government cannot access them. And that's a huge issue for gender data, because there have been tons of data that are there somewhere in the drawers, yet we cannot compile indicators that data is not being published and is just basically out of reach for accountability. And that's important. So for that data to come to light, you need a strong national statistical office to be able to coordinate data producers in the country, to tell them, okay, you have to share data sharing agreements, of course, quality protocols, data privacy, of course, observed here. So there's an important legal work that has to take place, right? Yet we know that this is hard to achieve because of that, multitude of institutions that produce that data. So what countries do, they set up very often technical working groups for gender statistics or interagency technical committees where you have, a chair statistics office or a ministry in charge of women's affairs, someone who is really can push the needle on the availability of data and reunite other producers of gender statistics in the country and help design some good action plan in terms of how data will be shared and compiled. And that requires strong institutions, of course, that requires some leadership, that requires capacity of these institutions to collaborate, because many ministries still don't have data people in their premises. So they may outsource that data collection to maybe some junior staff who is always on turnover. So capacity issues are really multiple. But that's collaboration and coordination of something that is really cross-cutting and horizontal is important. And we also in Paris 21 we look at capacity development also from the individual level perspective. So there are often people like us working on data who are very often siloed. They don't talk to other people, they don't network, they don't see their role actually in advancing gender data. And yet there is actually a lot of an individual responsibility in that work that we see. And in many countries, you see gender data champions. There's a gender data network hosted currently by Open Data Watch, Data2X, and with support also from Paris 21, where we try to bring these gender data statisticians from low and middle income countries for them to exchange best practices, to network, to partner, to learn about what's going on in other countries. So that kind of individual level capacity is so important. And of course, legal frameworks for gender data. So we see many countries actually mandating sex disaggregation, production of sex disaggregated data in their statistics laws, and that's a foundation. There exist other policy instruments like decrees, strategies, and various political or legal instruments that countries can put in place to support gender data production. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liliana.
Amna,
Yes.
just a quick addition on just also a practical example.
Of course.
And of course, very lovely to hear the submission. I just needed to add about the voluntary national reviews, the VNRs. And I think that's also something that I've had an opportunity to see how it works in my country. I think Kenya has submitted two voluntary national reviews to the UN High-Level Political Forum. We had the 2017 VNR, and this one was focused on SDG mainstreaming, baseline data, and early institutional progress. And also we did have the 2020 VNR that was highlighting progress on poverty reduction, health, and education. But also it did recognize the gaps when it comes to gender inequality, financing, and data availability. So, and the fact that the VNR always depend on a multi-stakeholder consultation between CSOs, county governments, and development partners. So I think it's a good practice for just countries, not only across the continent, but also globally when it comes to the quality of the data that we need that can inform policy-making processes. Thanks.
No, thank you so much, Bina, for adding that, because I really want to, I've heard the word financing now several times, and this is something also Amanda mentioned in the beginning about financing data systems that can produce quality data, Bina, as you said, and Liliana, you also touched upon. Amanda, do you want to expand on this point a bit further about financing for quality data collection mechanisms? And if we have global best practices that you want to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, I think financing is crucial. When the SDGs were adopted, the the goal of the finance was $17 trillion. So you'd be able to implement the SDGs at all levels. I don't think we're nearly close to achieving this number. And I think one of the biggest issues that we see now, especially the past few years, there has been a lot of cuts to financing for data, for democracy, for humanitarian assistance, for things across the board. So foreign aid cuts is also going to play a crucial role in how data systems will work moving forward, because there is not a lot of money to implement all of this data, the data needs that we need. So financing is definitely crucial. We saw in the Financing for Development conference in Spain that there is a will for countries to have more financing done, but we don't know where this financing is coming from. Many of the big actors that used to finance a lot of the SDGs, they are pushing back a little bit on how much money they're putting into the system. So this is an issue. So we need to be a little bit creative in how we're going to bring financing to the table, especially for developing countries that are already not in great positions when it comes to implementing the SDGs and also to providing data sources from the national level. So it's I don't have an answer to your question per se, because we just need more money, and I don't know where the money could come from, apart from like the very big countries out there that are currently cutting aid across the spectrum. So it's, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer. I don't have a positive answer. That's what I should say. I'm so sorry.
No, no, you're not responsible for this, but it's the answer is so obvious. We know where the money lies. We earlier, it was alluded to progress, but disparity in progress. So we always we have that, and to bridge the gap between high-income countries and low-income countries, that will remain a problem unless financing is done in a way that's more equitable. But this does bring me to my last question now, which is on policy. How can policy reflect? Like we've spoken about some of these issues, different aspects of financing, different aspects of data collection in SDG 5. But how can policy reflect a holistic and grounded approach to addressing SDG 5 agenda now? And Bina, do you want to start with the country context and maybe expand to the African continent as well for us? Bina, can you hear me?
I'm not. I can. Are you able to repeat the question?
Oh, absolutely.
I was trying to swap my internet. It's just
Absolutely.
telling me unstable.
Absolutely. I can repeat the question. So I want you to sort of reflect on how policy can be holistic and grounded in the approach to addressing SDG 5 agenda. In terms of policy, what are some of the things that we need? And perhaps if you want to bring in a more local context, that would be great.
I think that we lost Bina. So maybe I'll start with the
Yes,
global context, and then when she
please.
comes in, yeah. So in terms of policy, I think we know what the policies are. So we see all these policies already in the documents produced by the United Nations, right? So as Liliana mentioned in the beginning, the Beijing Declaration is a perfect document. It's a perfect policy document. It tells you exactly every single thing that countries need to do in order to implement gender equality measures. There are 12 areas of focus in the Beijing plus 30. There has been some progress since there, but there has also been declines in several of the indicators that were already passed 30 years ago. So we have already policy papers and reports and outcome documents that tell us what needs to be done, how governments need to implement these policies at a local level. And it's really a matter of a political will for us to see these policies actually take place. One of the biggest issues that I see when it comes to what the UN produces and to what governments are doing is that despite us having all of these beautiful documents at the UN that have been approved by all of the countries of the United Nations, many governments don't know what they are. Many governments have several ministers in their cabinets. They have several parliamentarians that also don't know about all of these documents. They don't know that the Beijing Declaration exists. They don't know there is a political declaration that is passed at the SDG summits. They don't know that there is a ministerial declaration that is passed in the HLPF. And they don't know there are already all of these different policy ideas that can be implemented at the local level. So I think there needs to be also a better connection between the UN system, governments, and local governments as well. Excuse me. I think this is lacking. And once we are able to also bridge this gap, maybe we're going to be able to see better policy being implemented at the national and local levels as well. But right now, I think with this gap in communication, I don't think it helps the policies for gender equality.
Thank you so much, and that's very valid. It's this work in silos or existence in silos that is really harming the overall agenda for gender equality and the drive for it. Bina is back. Bina, do you want me to repeat the question? Because I can do that. If you just unmute yourself to see we
Yes,
can.
please repeat. I'm sorry, it dropped.
It's not a problem at all. So I'll repeat my question again. How can policy reflect a holistic and grounded approach to addressing the SDG 5 agenda? And we really want you to reflect on the country context and
Mhm.
from a local perspective, what do you think policy-wise, what are some of the things that we need to do?
Two things that I had in mind. Number one, policies must always start with evidence from the communities from the ground level up and not maybe just work with national averages. And I think for me, this means integrating data and experiences from grassroots women and young men, informal workers, whether it's caregivers, women, and persons living with disabilities. Also, I think for me, it's also should be informed by the fact that whether you're looking at women or young people, they are not a homogeneous group. So the same thing we've been saying in terms of quality, disaggregated data when it comes to age, geography, class, whether it's ability, whether it's the nature of the disability, that's going to be very, very, very important in informing the policies that are going to be effective. And I think before these questions, we're talking about financing. And when it comes to that, we need to also prioritize gender responsive budgeting because we know that policies are only as strong as the budgets that back them. So we have to ensure that they're linked to gender responsive budgeting frameworks, track and increase public investment in services that directly impact gender equality. Also allocate resources to CSOs, women-led organizations and movements that address needs for those especially left on the margins. I think those are the two critical areas that I was thinking about that I needed to share. Thanks.
Liliana, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, thanks so much. And a lot have been said already by Amna and Bina, but just to maybe add on the data side again on this importance of strengthening statistical data systems because they are the foundation of the SDG 5 and or gender sensitive goals and targets. So that includes, of course, the civil registration and vital statistics that register, when we are born, when we die, but also anything that happens with us in between, whether this is a marriage, whether this is a divorce, and so on. And that's really a foundation also for important gender data. Strengthening these administrative data sources, it's a huge task of coordination, of financing, of streamline, of infrastructure, but that is a must for gender data. Embedding gender equality in the national strategies and policy planning. So, that has to be part of the national development plan of all the statistical planning that are in the country. And also to echo Vina's call for gender sensitive budgeting that has also been, I think, reinforced in the FFD4 conference. So this is really, this is the place where the decisions are being taken and money is political, where it goes is political. And so gender perspective has to also be there. Promoting inclusive participation in data governance. So all the initiatives that try to bring these voices of civil society into the official data collection, the Copenhagen framework I mentioned, but also various participatory approaches to data. Closing the gender data financing gap. Of course, we need more financing now that huge donors have, removed themselves from the horizon. We know that gender data has always been financing by very few donors. So when one is out, it can also, it can even collapse the whole system. And of course, fostering global and local partnerships for SDG 5. So that means a lot of collaboration between national governments, international development agencies, civil society. That means a lot of South-South learning that is already happening but can be strengthened. Regional data initiatives, feminist data movements, they all are important actors of data. We have developed a participation for transformation framework with UN Women, which tries to set up a model where statistics offices, civil society, and women's ministries in charge of women's rights movements can actually work together and how it can be done, because there's no single house for gender data. That's unfortunately the truth. So how that trio can operate together and bring more insights to the policy making is very important. So with that, of course, I think it's always good to remind ourselves that, we are not just data points. We are, all of us has a role to play on gender equality and gender data in particular. Please, consult your website of the National Statistical Office. Look what's there. Maybe something's missing. Maybe there's already a gender data portal. If not, ask questions, and don't just think that, there are things that cannot be pushed. So that's, I think, an important call I would like to make in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liliana, for that. And something that you said really resonated, just not about data, but generally also gender cannot be an afterthought in any policy. Gender is not something you put, later on into a conversation unless it is holistically built into policy. It will not have the effect that we want it to. And, same goes for data, gender data, exactly, just exactly the same way. Before I move to the final segment of this, I would like to point out that both Lillian and Amanda have very kindly shared a lot of very interesting links in the chat box here. So those of us who are part of this conversation right now, please use these, look these up. These are interesting resources. Also, we will put these resources up on the IKNOW platform, and they can be accessed there. Um, this brings me to the last question that I have. It's really your final comments, which I would be grateful if you center them around this particular question on the criticality of bringing diverse voices. To global forums like the High Level Political Forum, how important is a diversity of opinion and diversity of voices? And particularly, how can this be done? How do we make sure that we have more representation from marginalized groups, from the global south, from vulnerable communities? Um, even when it comes to reviewing the SDG 5 or reviewing other SDGs, as Amanda mentioned, um, what needs to be done? So we can start in any order, but perhaps Amanda wants to come in, and then Lillian, and then we can have Pina.
I'll be happy to come in on this. It's extremely important to bring diverse voices into the discussion. The UN does bring diverse voices in several of the discussions, especially in the meetings that are under the auspices of ECOSOC, which HRPF is one of them. So there are over 6,000 organizations that are accredited to ECOSOC, so civil society, NGOs, and so forth. So we do have the space for these organizations. However, there are many member states that do not want diverse voices to be brought into the discussion because they think that the UN is only a place for member states to be able to interact and put documents and policy together. So, and I feel like this has been my answer a lot to you. I don't have an answer per se, because it really depends on member states and political will to bring different voices into the discussions. And I'm talking specifically at the UN, not at the local level, not at the government. And I think Bina will be able to speak a little bit more about that, because there's also a lot of room to bring civil society into that discussion. But in terms of the UN, it's also very good to point out that even though you do have oftentimes civil society in the room and different groups in the room, they're not part of member states, you cannot just have them attend and speak just for the sake of it. You need to actually actively listen to them and incorporate their ideas into the discussion and into the documents that are being passed at the UN. And this is something that sometimes it doesn't happen. There are several countries that do try to bring these voices into the documents, but there are a huge number of countries that do not want these voices in. And there's not much that I can do about it. There's not much that you can do about it, unfortunately. We can push for this, right? For the member states to be more inclusive of this, but it really is up to the member states at the end of the day to bring these voices in a meaningful way and not just to show that they are there. So I will stop there, but I would love to hear about the country level perspective from Dina on this as well.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think I would love to just start with my reflection on my experience trying to attend the CSW this year. Number one, I think for me, I'd love to speak to the challenge of local organizations, grassroots movements, CBOs like us, when it comes to getting accreditation from ECOSOC. So it means with us the accreditation, you're not even allowed in the UN complex to be able to participate in the conversation. So I think personally, the only way I was able to attend was through another organization that was accredited, that is CREW. So I did reach out to CREW, and then they reached out to Forwarded in Uganda, and it's Forwarded that gave me the accreditation. But that's because someone had to intervene, and that is CREW that had to intervene and get me the accreditation to be able to represent our organization. Yeah. So I'd like to speak to the challenge of accessibility, especially for marginalized groups of young people. And I think when we talk about bringing diverse voices into the global forums, it's just not important. It's very, very urgent. And for me, when I reflect on this, I think I always think about the fact that we certainly need to move from the representation as a tokenism, yeah, but then ensuring that representation is about power and is about influence and is about amplifying the voices of those closest to the challenges. Also, how do we contribute to making this happen? So I've spoken about accessibility, making it easier to access these platforms, yeah. I think number two, it can be quite expensive, honestly, because that was a whole week, and our own institution was not even able to support, let's say, more than 3 people to attend the convening. I don't know how many grassroots organizations can even afford to support their own members of the institution to travel, so that they ensure that we have diversity, but then they are able to center the lived realities of the people that they represent back at home. So then how do we create funded pathways for the participation of grassroots and youth-led movements? Because as we did say when we're starting this conversation, we're looking at a very young continent, speaking about the African continent, where the median age is 20. So when you think about youth movements, majority of the youth movements, majority of the youth-led organization are pretty much underfunded. So many a times you find that you do not even have an opportunity to be able to contribute to center the voices of those who you represent in such important global convenings like this one. And I think Lillian had already spoken about inclusive languages and formats that recognize different knowledge systems, so that we ensure that language is not exclusionary, even as we travel to these spaces, even as we contribute in these spaces, that it's just not very academic, language that we're using, but we're using inclusive language. And I think lastly for me, Amna, would be to shift from extractive participation to shared agenda setting, and not just asking who's at the table, but then how are we helping build the table? Many a times when we come into these spaces, the agenda has already been set. So you're just a contributor. Yeah. And for instance, like there's no room for you to shift from the agenda that has already been set. For instance, even with some of the sessions that I attended during this year's CSW, while there were some aspects that we could have contributed to from the inception, there was very limited opportunity to change what had already been lined up. So you either attend and add on to it, but then it's so hard to shift. So how can we ensure that we are co-creators when it comes to this conversation, and we are not just invited as contributors, and that our representation is not tokenistic? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bina. You've raised really, really important points on diversity, and I completely echo all of these. I completely agree to what you're saying. Liliana, do you want to come in here now to sort of round up this answer for us?
Thank you. No, I have a difficult task now, but just to echo my predecessors who have been wonderful, and so I am in support to what has been said so far. My only call will be to make sure we are not tone deaf. So if you go to data spaces today, the world is looking into AI, whether we like it or not, and we have to be part of the AI table. So, as just to echo what Bina has just said, I see many forums that are still made of experts of AI, and there's just men at these tables. So, how are women going to access that space? It's really crucial. How are we helping to build the table of AI? How is Gen AI reflecting our lived reality, and are official gender data visible to AI? I think that's a big question. I can tell you already a disclaimer. AI is not reading official data very well. So we have a lot to do with that. There is a lot of capacity building that has to take place, especially when we think of the interaction of national statistical offices and civil society, mentoring, capacitating, leadership training, but of course also ensuring that everyone believes and understands their role in the provision of insights and data. We have wonderful initiatives already in place, Spotlight Initiative that gives capacity strengthening to women's rights organizations. We have in our little corner training to leadership for women statisticians, middle managers. We have training for civil society to use data for advocacy, whether this is gender equality or climate change, but we have to be on the trends, and we have to make sure that our voices are heard. So we have to believe that this is not a conversation that is just happening in another room and we can just stay and wait for the outcomes, right? So achieving SDG 5 demands a data revolution, yes, but it has to be inclusive, well-financed, grounded in national statistical systems. It's not a standalone problem, just to rephrase our initial thoughts, but it's an integral part of the development agenda of all countries. It's not a luxury, it's a prerequisite for effective evidence-based policymaking that leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liliana. I think you did a very good job of rounding up the answer. And yes, diversity is really the key to a shared future where no one is left behind. This brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I just want to talk a little bit more about the AI and different topics that have been raised. But unfortunately, this is all the time that we have, and I think we'll be doing more webinars on AI and how data sets are being read by the AI, because technology facilitated gender-based violence is now on the rise and a critical issue, especially when it comes to politics. That's something that we're really, really interested in working on. Um, so that is all from us. Thank you so much for everybody who's joined today. This webinar will be available on YouTube and then later on the Politics platform as well. But thank you for listening in today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.